Welcome to our Clean Air webinar series. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. So these webinars are developed in collaboration between Alberta Capital Airshed and West Central Airshed Society. My name is Selena Fairbank. I am the engagement coordinator for Alberta Capital Airshed, and I will be your facilitator this afternoon. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Alberta Capital Airshed is located on Treaty 6 territory, and West Central Airshed Society is on Treaty 6 and 8 territories, the traditional and ancestral territories of many First Nations, including the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta. We acknowledge our part in treaty by being thoughtful about the air we breathe and how we can work to ensure it is healthy and life-giving for our Earth, the current generation, and for many generations to come. I invite you to take a moment to consider the land and air from which you join us today. Today's webinar is titled Breathe Easy, Managing Asthma and Changing Air Quality. We will explore how increasing air pollution and extreme heat events are impacting asthma, how these environmental factors can trigger and worsen symptoms, and gain practical strategies to prevent, recognize, and manage asthma exacerbations. For those who don't know, May is Asthma Awareness Month in Canada. It's a national campaign dedicated to raising awareness for the over 4.6 million Canadians living with asthma. Led by Asthma Canada, the month features educational initiatives, advocacy for better care, and the lighting of national landmarks in blue to support those affected. Tuesday, May 5th is also recognized as World Asthma Day. The global initiative for asthma theme for World Asthma Day in 2026 is Access to Anti-Inflammatory Inhalers for Everyone with Asthma, Still an Urgent Need. I am delighted to introduce our three speakers today who have joined us to share their expertise and experiences. First, we'll hear from Dr. Ann Hicks, an associate professor in pediatric respiratory medicine at the University of Alberta. Also joining us today, we have Dr. Eric Levine, research scientist with Environmental Health Science and Research Bureau, Health Canada, and Sarah Butson, CEO at the Canadian Lung Association. Before we begin our presentations, I'm just going to share a little bit of information about our airsheds. Alberta Capital Airshed and West Central Airshed Society are not-for-profit multi-stakeholder organizations responsible for monitoring outdoor air quality in our respective regions. The data collected from our continuous monitoring stations is publicly reported and used to calculate the Local Air Quality Health Index, or AQHI, for many communities. To promote air quality awareness and address local concerns, ACA and WestCast offer outreach and educational opportunities, including this webinar series. To learn more and listen to recordings of past webinars, you can visit our websites, capitalairshed.ca or wcas.ca. A little bit of housekeeping today. The webinar will last about 60 minutes. Each panelist will do a short presentation, and then we will open the floor to your questions. You can register your questions at any time using the chat or Q&A feature, and we will do our best to get them all addressed following the presentations. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording link will be sent to everyone who registered and as well available on our website. Please feel free to share the recording with anyone who is interested. With that, on to our first presentation. A warm welcome to Dr. Ann Hicks. Ann is a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Children's Lung Health, an Associate Professor in Pediatric Respiratory Medicine, and the lead of the Stollery Children's Environmental Health Clinic, a WHO collaborating center. She founded the Stollery Pediatric Complex Asthma Clinic and collaborates on provincial and national asthma care pathways. Her interdisciplinary research group studies how air pollution and other exposures affect lung health and development. Thank you for joining us today, Ann.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited to actually hear from our other speakers today, and I'll jump right in. I'm going to focus more on how asthma affects our body. We already started with a land acknowledgement, but I'll draw your attention to the square outlined in dark and to the map of Canada. First of all, Canada is experiencing climate change at a more rapid rate than a lot of the rest of the world because we're in the north. And in particular, our Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit populations are disproportionately experiencing heat and air pollution associated with climate change. I have some disclosures, although I don't receive any personal consulting fees, honoraria, or salary. I do have grant support. I run some clinical trials and I'm part of several um, societies. I also work for Alberta Health Services as a respirologist. Yeah. So by the end of our next 10 minutes or so together, I'm hoping that everybody will take away a good understanding of how heat and air pollution impact the body, particularly vulnerable people like children and people with asthma and related conditions like COPD. And that you'll feel confident in developing some practical solutions when you think about how you're going to prevent, recognize, or manage asthma exacerbations. Now, you'll see a QR code here for the University of Alberta Climate Change and Health Hub. And throughout my talk, I'm not a person that's like, hey, don't look at your phone while I'm talking. I'm more like, hey, scroll through your phone and pick up some useful and kind of cool connections. So please go ahead and do that. We'll jump right in. How does air pollution affect our body? Well, first of all, how does it get in? So different sizes of particles work different ways. If you look at that red line, larger particles, the ones you can see, stop at your mouth and throat. And this is where nose hair is your friend and not a cosmetic disability, because it's actually useful in sifting out a lot of the bigger parts of wildfire smoke. As particles get smaller, they land in your airway, maybe your windpipe or some of the larger airways. But when they get really small, so that particulate matter at 2.5 microns, and about 30 of those little guys would fit across a single human hair, they're going down into the alveoli. That's the part of your lungs where we soak oxygen into our body, get rid of waste gas, and where a whole lot of infection fighting goes on. So by size, particles are kind of sifted out through your airway. The really tiny particles, PM 0.1, can be directly absorbed into your bloodstream. As well as size and where they end up, the amount of particles and what they're made of is really, really important. So toxic things, lead, mercury, some of the products of combustion from wildfires are going to create more trouble for your body than plain old sand or something that doesn't really interact with anything. They can cause inflammatory problems. Whether they're water soluble or oil soluble will dictate where they go in your body and how those particles that you breathe in interact with each other with chemical reactions and interact with the different things in your body that help with your immune system and inflammation will also say how they're going to affect your body. How do we feel that? Well, in the short term, we've all been outside on those smoky days where your eyes start to burn and your nose runs and you're sneezing and you get a sore throat and you're coughing, trying to clear out your airway. You might start to wheeze. People with asthma or COPD might have an attack even as those airways get irritated. Because we're using up a lot of the chemicals and processes in our body that are used to fight viruses and bacterial infections, and we're getting some lung damage along the skin on the insides of our lungs, we're more at risk of getting sick when we're infected with a virus. And for pregnant people, they're more likely to have a small baby or an early baby if they're exposed to wildfire smoke. In the longer term, breathing in all of these air pollutants impacts your heart and lung health. It changes how well you finish growing and developing as an adult. You see more risk of autistic spectrum disorder, ADHD, and more progression of neurologic disorders like dementia. And obviously, that's going to affect both our general and our mental health. So, lots of impacts. What about heat? So we've kind of talked about air pollution. Heat and air pollution go together a lot of the time with climate change. I've picked three of my favorite organ systems. As a respirologist, of course, lungs go in the middle. They're the center of the universe. But let's start with the heart. When we get hot, our blood goes more to our skin so that we can sweat and we can cool ourselves off. When that happens, our blood pressure drops because more of it's on the outside, so less of it is circulating around the big vessels, getting sent to your heart and your kidneys and your lungs. So when our blood pressure goes down, our kidneys start to get upset. Kidneys are very delicate and sensitive little guys. As we lose fluid, they feel dehydrated. They stop weeding out toxins as well for us, and they get under strain. We can even get something called an acute kidney injury if we get too dried out. The kidneys are going to stop you from making urine, and they're going to stop you from sweating because they want to hang on to that last little bit of fluid that keeps them healthy. And they send those messages back to the heart. And they also say, heart, you should beat faster. You're under strain. Your heart's a big muscle. It needs lots of oxygen for part of its energy. But now we're not getting good oxygen delivery because there's less fluid in our system. So the heart calls on the lungs and it says, I need more oxygen. You got to breathe harder, breathe faster. So you're breathing harder and faster, but you're breathing in that contaminated air from wildfire smoke, leading to possible asthma or COPD attacks. And you're working harder. So you're asking the heart for more energy, and your heart's like, hey man, I'm already making more work here. And that can lead to heat exhaustion and eventually heat stroke, which is the biggest cause of death during these events. So we already talked a bit about who's at risk. Well, people who are more frail or more susceptible, so those with asthma, COPD, other heart or lung diseases, the elderly, people who are pregnant, and of course children. And why are children so high at risk? Think about a baby. Babies are tiny, but they have a huge surface area for every kilo or pound, if you're more imperial, of body mass, which means that they take in more toxins. They breathe fast. A baby sleeping will breathe at 140 they breathe at 40 breaths a minute, and their heart rate's around 140 beats a minute. So that is a lot. Try it out. It's really, really fast breathing rate compared to you as an adult. And your metabolism is moving quickly, but also your body is growing and developing. So that means that we can disrupt your developmental direction, and you might not grow to your best potential. Kids are also little, they're down near the floor, they pick up lots of extra contaminants, they put stuff in their mouth, and they can't control where you put them. So little kids can't get out of a car if it's hot. Little kids can't come inside when it's smoky unless you help them. Their liver and kidneys are a little bit less effective at removing toxins, and they're exposed to all of these things for a lot longer, because when you're exposed when you're 2 and not 92, you're living with that for an extra 90 years. So that kind of tells us who's at risk and what heat and air pollution do to the body. But what about when we think about asthma? So normal airways are nice and smooth. When you look down with a camera, they almost look like looking down the inside of a garden hose. They've got a nice even airway wall, and they're made to allow oxygen to cross in and waste gas to cross out. So they're very thin walled. They're wrapped around with muscle that looks almost like crisscrossed shoelaces. Asthma is when you get airflow obstruction that's reversible. So if you use one of those reliever puffers that are blue or blue and white, you can get improvement. And it's generally driven by different causes of inflammation, often allergic. An asthma attack happens when we have that inflammation that causes airway swelling. And then just like eyes cry tears, noses and lungs cry mucus. So then your airways will get plugged up with mucus. And during attacks, you can also get a spasm of the airway muscle or tightening called bronchospasm. When we take our reliever, that relieves the bronchospasm. So it loosens those tight airway muscles, allows you to cough out the mucus, but you still have a lot of underlying inflammation. Asthma controllers deal with those in the long term, but they can take weeks to months to work, so you need to be on them regularly. And asthma rescue medications like oral steroids or IV steroids affect the whole body, so lots and lots of side effects, but they do get the inflammation down fast. What do you feel? Well, you're coughing. Wheeze is the sound of air trying to pass through those tight, narrow airways. And of course, if our lungs are full of stuck air that are behind these tight airways, we're going to be short of breath. Our chest is going to feel tight. We're going to feel like elephants are sitting on us, and we're not going to be able to exercise very well. So we've got to control this. Asthma control means that you don't need a reliever or have symptoms more than twice a week, and never at night, because who thinks a bad night is a good thing? You should be able to do your physical activity without a reliever or any extra help. And you should only have mild exacerbations. Like if you get sick, you might need a reliever, but you're not needing any full body steroid. You're not going to emergency. You're not missing work, school, fun activities, and your quality of life is good. Your asthma action plan is a contract between you and your healthcare providers that allows you to maintain asthma control. And I really see it as a contract. So, as a healthcare provider, it's not my job to tell you what to do. It's my job to show you what the options are and help you troubleshoot your asthma till you find a way to keep it in good control. And that is critical. And the I Can Control Asthma website has lots of good action plans. So, what do you do when you're well? What controllers do you use? It might be very little if you have mild asthma. It might be very big if you have moderate to severe asthma. What are you going to do if you start to feel a tickle in your lungs? Are you going to take a reliever? And what do you do if things are getting bad? When do you go for help? So those are really important parts of your action plan. So asthma isn't you, it doesn't define you, but asthma might be part of a person. I think a bit like glasses. You can control asthma. Plan ahead, know what your triggers are. People might think about, well, what's the AQHI at which I start to have asthma symptoms? You want to stay out of that, and you want to be prepared. Have your prescriptions, your action plan, make sure that you've got your meds with you, make sure you have health insurance if you're traveling, and take your reliever when you're hiking, of course, and things like that. Maintain control by using your regular controllers, and work with your healthcare provider to choose treatments that work with minimal side effects. That is critical. It's a conversation. And treat asthma early. You don't get a free t-shirt. That's totally a myth, right? Oh, tough it out. No t-shirt. Have your action plan, use your action plan, take your relievers if you need them. But it's not your fault if you have a bad attack, especially when air is bad and when heat is hot. So go get help if you need it. So thanks very much, and I'm really thrilled to pass the torch to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Anne. I appreciate you sharing your expertise and practical guidance with us. Before we do move on to our next presentation with Eric, I just wanted to share some information on a new workshop that we launched as part of our services available to both members and non-members. This is the Air Aware Wildfire Smoke and Health Workshop. It's an interactive session designed to help individuals and organizations better understand the connection between air quality and health, particularly during wildfire smoke events. So participants will learn what air quality is, how it affects health, and practical steps they can take to prepare for and respond to wildfire smoke events. We can customize the workshop to meet the needs of a specific audience with content adapted to explore topics most relevant to different groups and communities. Some of our specialization options include for childcare facilities, outdoor workers, sports teams, event organizers, people with pre-existing health conditions like asthma, people working with individuals experiencing homelessness, seniors, and people working with seniors, as well as municipalities, communities, organizations, and the general public. If you would like more information, you can contact us at info@capitalairshed.ca or info@wcas.ca. With that, let's turn to our next presenter, Dr. Eric Levine. Eric is an environmental epidemiologist and a research scientist with Health Canada, an adjunct professor in the School of Epidemiology and Public Health at the University of Ottawa, and an adjunct scientist with the Institute for Clinical Evaluative Sciences in Ontario. His research interests lie in the connection between air pollution and climate change, particularly regarding early life exposure and the health of children. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to be presenting today. So we know that exposure to air pollution and heat can co-occur on certain days, and we know that these events are likely going to increase in terms of frequency, especially in the context of wildfire smoke. We see that wildfire smoke is something that might likely be more toxic than urban air pollution, but still needs to be further confirmed. So the key question here is on the epidemiological point of view, what does each exposure does in terms of the population impacts, and when the two coincides, when air pollution increases and also when heat occurs, what type of impacts can we see on the population? And really well explain the physiological mechanisms and underlying reasons why vulnerable populations might be more at risk to these types of exposures. We know that children are more at risk because of several reasons, partly because they breathe more air per kilogram of body weight, but also that they likely spend more time outside than most adults. So asthma management becomes important when we think about those compound exposures, those combined exposures to heat and air pollution, whether it's air pollution coming from urban sources or in the context of wildfires. So hot polluted days can really compress the margin of safety. We know that when there's episodes of extreme heat, the heat can likely increase the breathing demand. It can likely change our activity patterns. We likely need to modify perhaps activities for children. We know that when there's air pollution episodes, whether it's coming from smoke from wildfires or from smog, that we need to reorganize activities for children. Now, one question is, in terms of the public health action, is do we have to establish some sort of threshold that we need to implement when the two exposures occur? And by two exposures, I'm referring to what we sometimes refer to in this type of literature, which is the synergistic effect. So, in other words, when air pollution occurs on its own, when there's a bad air quality day, but temperatures are pretty much normal, or when the opposite, when there's an extreme heat episode, but the air quality is pretty normal, what are the effects? But when we look at the two combined together, are we seeing more effects in terms of the health impacts than what we would have seen if the two exposures would occur independently? So sometimes we refer to those as synergistic effects or additive risks, but it's all to sort of quantify on a public health point of view those impacts in terms of whether those two impacts together would have a greater influence on health than the two independently. There's more and more evidence coming on the epidemiological point of view, where in the US and in China, there's more and more studies that have been published looking at the heat and air pollution interaction, especially in children, and looking at perhaps respiratory outcomes, asthma, for instance. Most evidence out there is mainly done in adults, but in the US, there's emerging evidence showing that perhaps having an elevated concentration of some types of air pollutant, in this case, it was elemental carbon, that combination with extreme heat could likely influence having more exacerbation of asthma. So perhaps in this case, it was measured through emergency department visits. And in China, they found some similar also pattern where they looked at increasing temperatures and combined with air pollution, and this had an impact on hospitalization, so likely more asthma-related hospitalization. Now, there's some recent evidence. There's a paper that I've been part of that it's still not published yet, but it will be soon, where we combine data from several countries and we looked at the impacts of wildfire PM 2.5, so particulate matter less than 2.5 micrometers, and extreme heat on pediatric hospitalization for several different types of pediatric hospitalization. And we looked at the independent effect, so heat alone, PM 2.5 from wildfires alone, and then the two combined. Now, what you see here is actually the results for the all-cause analysis. So looking at all-cause hospitalization, and we have data across Canada for different census divisions across the country. So we used national hospitalization data. And we had data also for other countries that are also affected by wildfires. We found that extreme heat had a little greater risk than wildfire PM alone. But when the two were combined, the risks appeared to be around 3.8% of increased risk of hospitalization for all-cause pediatric hospitalization. But when looking at specifically respiratory disease, and in this study, we didn't look at asthma specifically, but respiratory hospitalization, we found a 6.8% risk increase. So this translated into sometimes epidemiologists use something called the relative excess risk due to interaction. So the RERI is a statistical measure that is used to quantify synergistic effects. So the combination of two exposures together, how likely it's having an impact compared to independent exposures. And whenever this number is above zero, it means that there's a likely synergistic effect. And that's what we found in this study here, that heat and PM2.5 from wildfires had likely a greater risk than the independent exposures on their own. Now, the evidence on smoke impacts on their own and heat on asthma is coming progressively in terms of the impacts on asthma in children, but there still hasn't been a lot of research done in this area. So for instance, there's studies showing the impact of smoke PM2.5 on asthma hospitalization, including some data coming from Canada, some data coming from California, lots of research from California. And there's also quite a number of evidence looking at heat and smoke interaction coming from California, especially in the context of their major wildfire events that occurred there. So the heat and smoke evidence is emerging, but the evidence on smoke alone is already there and already there to support action in order to show the impacts on asthma in children. Now, one question that we may have is whether so the studies that I showed were mainly acute effects, so day-to-day fluctuations, and how likely this might have an impact on the increased number of ED visits or hospitalization for asthma in children. But what about the prenatal exposure or the early life exposure over several weeks or for, let's say, major episodes of wildfire that might have an impact? We don't have yet the answer for the impact of smoke, PM2.5, and the impact on whether this might increase the risk of asthma development in children. But we know that for air pollution, combined with heat during the gestational period or during the early life period, there might be something going on there. There's a major study that was done using the Progress Spurt cohort in Mexico that looked into this issue where they found that some critical windows of exposure during pregnancy were at greater risk of having respiratory impacts in children. So the exposure to specific pollutants like PM2.5 and NO2 during specific weeks of gestation were associated with higher odds of developing some sort of signal for respiratory health impact in terms of wheeze. And also looking at extreme heat, warmer temperature during the later part of gestation was also associated with those types of respiratory impact. Now, the question is whether those impacts could occur synergistically when looking at those subchronic effects during the gestational window. And in this study, what they found is that when we look at different categories of risk, when we combine lower temperature exposure, lower PM2.5 exposure, and so on, heat alone, PM2.5 alone, and then the two combined together during specific windows of development, they actually found that an odds ratio of 7.02 for development of wheeze at age 7, 8 years old. And this was when PM2.5 was elevated concentration of PM2.5 and high temperature exposure that occurred during the first year of life. Their relative excess risk due to interaction, so this is the statistical measure for synergistic effect, was greater than 0. So it showed some indication that those two combined together when looking at the early life exposures could be something to look into in the future. We recently published a study, and this is not asthma specifically, but this is looking at heat waves in Canada and PM2.5 from wildfires and looking at preterm birth across Canada. And we looked at the time period from 2010 to 2021, and we actually found that different combinations of heat wave were combined with elevated amounts of PM2.5 were actually increasing the risk of preterm birth. But the most risk that we observed was when the concentration of PM2.5 were actually at moderate level, not necessarily at the higher level. So in other words, something to keep in mind where in terms of communication of risks, the actual risk might not be greater at the higher concentration. It might be when we actually don't necessarily see the smoke outside. So I know I'm running out of time here, but I think communicating the risk is something very important. We need to consider both together, PM 2.5 from air pollution, whether it's urban air pollution or wildfires and heat, in order to make sure that we put together action plan in order to protect children in the context of asthma exacerbation or even asthma development. And on that note, I will leave it here and thank you all for listening in.
Thank you so much, Eric. I really appreciated your presentation. I hope it provided valuable context for everyone watching to help understand the impacts of our changing climate on asthma. Before we hear from Sarah, I just wanted to share that we are excited to announce that the live air data map on both the ACA and WestCast websites have gone through some upgrades, thanks to the work of our data manager, Kevin McCullum, and our membership coordinator, Colton Narabeski. The WestCast map and ACA map are both live. It's new, exciting, just yesterday. So on our maps, you are able to see both continuous monitoring stations and microsensor data, which is helpful to visually see air quality across the region. So while our purple air microsensors monitor solely for PM 2.5, we did add equivalent AQHI colors to location dots so that viewers can equate the readings, which are actually in micrograms per meter cubed, to the AQHI scale. So it is not a true AQHI as it is only one parameter, but it is comparable and very useful during high PM days like smoke events. So an excellent tool to use when you are creating your asthma action plan and looking at whether or not you can go outside. So we do also now have location-specific air quality for anywhere in our region. You can click anywhere on the map and a window will appear showing the nearest stations, microsensors, and the local AQHI, both current and forecasted. We've also added Fire Smoke Canada buttons, which allows viewers to see current and forecasted wildfire smoke information. You can also see current wind direction and view the map in either street view or satellite view. So with that, I would like to welcome our final presenter, Sarah Butson from the Canadian Lung Association. Sarah has worked for over 15 years in the field of health promotion and chronic disease prevention. She's serving as the CEO of the Canadian Lung Association. She champions the cause of lung health, focusing on everything from prevention and care to groundbreaking research and discovery. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Selena. And what a great webinar so far. So happy to be a part of it. And I think actually a well-designed one in that, we sort of saw the build up of some of the evidence behind these issues. And now I will share from the charitable perspective. Oh, my apologies. insert that again. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the Canadian Lung Association, our mission is around breathing. And so we tend to say that we work for the 1 in 5 with lung disease. And apologies, I don't know why this is going into automatic mode, but we say we work for the 1 in 5 with lung disease, but also the 5 in 5 that simply breathe and have lungs. And so, I don't think that there is a better issue than air quality that really impacts both of those groups. People that have lung disease are, as we've heard, more impacted and so are more likely to suffer some of those triggers that may result in an exacerbation of their asthma. But also, people who otherwise may have the luxury of taking their lungs for granted are reminded on those poor air quality days that our every breath is important. And so what I'm going to do today is share a little bit about some public polling data that we had done at the national level. Part of our curiosity is often, are Canadians concerned about air quality? Are they feeling some of these health impacts that we know the evidence tells us are potentially harmful? And then what is the appetite for some of the policy change? So I'm going to share some of those results that we did with Abacus data back in the fall of last year that was surveyed to over 1,500 Canadians as part of a national representative survey. And then I'll go ahead and I'll share at the end some of the resources that we offer to help people best manage their lung disease. So, one of the questions that we wanted to ask straight out of the gate is, well, are people experiencing symptoms of respiratory illness? And apologies, you'll have to bear with me with this auto slide.
Sarah, you're welcome to close out and just try to remove that if you want really quickly on your end. We don't mind
you know what?
pausing.
I'm not sure actually how to do that. Well, what I could possibly just do is simply, sorry about this, folks. I don't actually know why it defaulted to that. This is what I'll do. Okay. Let's try this again. There has to be one person, right, on the slideshow that has some technical difficulties. It can't be smooth. Okay, I think that should work. Okay, so we asked Canadians how many people are actually experiencing these types of respiratory challenges. So things like coughing, wheezing, shortness of breath, chest tightness. And we actually, it's not safe, it's not fixed, but we actually thought it was about 1 in 5. And so while this is typical for what we say in terms of disease, this is actually full population. And so that number jumps to 51 when it comes to people with lung disease. We then asked people, are they actually concerned about how climate change may be impacting their health? And it's pretty significant. So 4 in 5 Canadians are concerned generally about the impacts of climate change on their health. But you can see from the pie that even amongst those that don't have a great amount of current worry about themselves, there is worry about the future generations and future impacts on health. When we ask specific to air pollution, we actually have 7 in 10 Canadians who are concerned about the impact of air pollution on their lung health. And that exceeded what we saw for other different types of pollutants or things that we know may impact our lung health. And so air pollution is, really top of mind for folks. Now, one thing that I should mention with respect to these slides is that the first time that we did these slides was back in 2023. which many of you will recall was a particularly bad year for wildfires. And so air quality was top of mind for people at that time. And so in some spaces, we've seen a slight reduction over the years, but actually the level of concern that may have been created from that time has sustained across most of the areas. So, we see general levels of concern amongst Canadians. When we get specific about the types of air quality that they are concerned about, we saw heightened levels of concern around high traffic corridor areas. So people really paying attention to that impact of traffic related air pollution, which of course we know is so hazardous to our health, and less so indoors. So, one of the questions that we always ask ourselves is, education is good, but do people do anything with that information? And, part of our job as a charity and a resource for individuals living with lung disease is to help point people in the right direction. And so, one of the questions that we asked people was, well, are they actually paying more attention to air quality indexes? And in fact, we noted that people actually said they think they have been paying attention more to air quality health indexes, and that they were noticing impacts on their health from worsening air quality events, and notably making day-to-day decisions based on some of those air quality measures. And I take Eric's point from the last webinar presentation that getting to that piece around, when there's smoke in the air, we think to check, but how do we build in checking as part of a regular part of our daily lives? And people that know about the air quality health index think that it's a valuable tool, that there should be more education and information about the tool and how to use it. And generally that solutions should be prioritized. When it comes to policy change, and we always ask about support for stricter regulations, we found across the board fairly strong regulations. Now, some of this varies when we get into specifics about particular regulations, but in general, Canadians are supportive of measures that are meant to better protect our lung health. And so, I think the big takeaways for us from this most recent poll was that people care about their health. Certainly, people with lung disease care about their health because we saw those numbers even higher. They're feeling the impacts already, and there is an appetite for action. And so I'll just spend a few moments now rolling through some of the resources that we provide. Given that we know that people care, we know that they want more information, they want to know what to do. And so that's part of our role as a patient-facing organization. And so, it is topical in terms of some of the things that we offer. But if you do visit our website, we do have tips and resources around how to best protect your lungs in times of wildfire smoke. I know it was mentioned earlier on that it is Asthma Month, and some of the work that is being done by Asthma Canada. And one of the phenomenal things that they are launching as part of this May Asthma Month is to launch a new framework called the CARE Framework. And we've signed on to be supportive, to encouraging folks to know about this, knowing that air quality is something that can increase the chance that someone may have exacerbated symptoms. It's really important that the communities around them, the people around them actually know what to do if they see that happening. And so I hope you'll start to see this framework more. That is really meant to be an educational tool for people to help those that they may see having an asthma attack. We also have resources to help people better use their own inhalers. We know that when people are using their own inhalers correctly, that a well-managed asthma is sets you up for better success in times of poor air quality, although um, not all attacks can be prevented. The other thing that I would highlight, and this is a virtual program that we have for individuals living with lung disease. Mostly, many of the participants that join us have COPD, but some are adults living with asthma. And this is an online education resource and physical activity resource to help people continue to live their best lives. We have just recently added 2 modules specific to air quality into this Breathe Strong program that we are really excited to launch and implement this year. And then, another sort of tier of work that we do, and always happy to connect with folks, is advocate. So, we provide resources, we do some of those pieces, but we also advocate at the federal level, both in coalition with other groups, and often we lend the sort of the health perspective to an environmental table that is bringing some of these issues forward. And then finally, before we go to questions, research. We know that learning more about what exacerbates an asthma attack or an issue with someone's lung health is incredibly important. We know that innovations are possible. And so we've continued to invest in research, and in our last strategic plan identified that championing clean air is a top priority for the organization. And so we'll continue to invest in research in this area. And so thank you for bearing with me with the, slideshow. Add some excitement to the last presentation. And I will pass back to Selena for questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's always frustrating when technology works against us instead of with us. I've definitely been on that end of it too. But thank you so much for sharing the great work that the Canadian Lung Association is doing. So with that, we are going to get to Q&A. Colton, can you change our view? So we're gonna, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat at the bottom, or there is a Q&A function as well. We'll take them from either. This question, I believe, is for Sarah. It says, can parents of pediatric patients do the Breathe Strong course, or older pediatric patients do it themselves?
That's a great question. So it's not a typical approach that we've had before, but absolutely. I mean, I think knowledge is power. The program is geared toward adults, so you won't find specific pediatric information would be the main caveat that I would say to that. But we do have a number of other pediatric-based resources online. And then the other thing that I would highlight is just that we do have a lung health line where people can call and speak to a certified respiratory educator on non-urgent issues, but it is an opportunity to have some back and forth to ask some questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Again, please pop your questions into the chat or Q&A, but I do have some as well. What role does indoor air quality play, and what are some practical steps people can take at home to prevent asthma attacks? Who wants to jump in on that one?
I can go ahead. Indoor quality plays a critical role because, as we all know, we probably spend like 90% of our time indoors. So it's absolutely important. And there was actually a recent review by the National Collaborating Center for Environmental Health looking at wildfire and infiltration in indoor air environments. They found that obviously, having windows open is not good, as we expected. Closing windows was actually reducing the infiltration indoor-outdoor ratio. It was actually reducing in indoor concentration by about 8 to 10%. But then having air purifier was actually very beneficial in reducing the particulate matter that would get indoor. And this is based on research that they found in their review. So obviously, there's a lot of things that needs to be considered: age of the building, the windows, how old they are, and so on. But it shows that even when there's a wildfire smoke episode out there, closing windows, yes, but having a proper ventilation system, purifier is certainly something of importance.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that answer. I'm going to ask this one to Anne. What should an asthma action plan include to account for changing air quality and climate conditions? You mentioned asthma action plans in your presentation.
Yeah, so that's a really important question. And I think when we look at our asthma action plan and we go to that prevent asthma attacks part, the first part of that is avoiding our triggers. So it's really going to be understanding air quality. And for a lot of our patients, we recommend that they do put an AQHI alert on their phone. And I know that you've worked in the past with Dr. Amina Hussein at the University of Alberta, but the Alberta Airshed web pages that give you that more detailed view as well with the microsensors are also really, really helpful. So people should be checking their air quality. Often it's particulate matter, which you might be able to smell, taste, or see, but we also have to think about ozone and other triggers that can cause health harm that we can't detect, but our AQHI will give us that information to help us. So we do ask our patients, especially the ones who are more triggered, to consider that. And I had one patient a long time ago who introduced it to the weather report every morning in their daycare, so that the daycare was actually considering air quality as one of the factors when they decided what they were doing with their outdoor play.
I think that's great. I do that myself. I look at the weather and the air quality first thing in the morning. This question is from an attendee, and I think it might tie in with your answer, Anne. It seems more people than ever are living with asthma. How are these folks being educated about the importance of making personal decisions based on ambient air quality or AQHI by the medical community? Did you want to add anything else onto your previous answer?
Yeah, again, I'll go back to children are vulnerable, and I think we all spoke to that. Um, so, how do we advocate for patients, and how do patients and parents advocate for each other? And especially when we look at summer camp, outdoor activities, and school or daycare, we need to make sure that the places that our vulnerable populations go are also informed about air quality, and that we have that consideration that maybe people can't be outside. The flip side of that is if it's a great day, put everything on hold and go outside. That is your day.
Thank you. I love that message too. It means I get to take the afternoon off, right? Um, this question I'll pose to any of you. How can public health messaging be improved to better reach people during rapidly changing conditions like wildfire smoke events?
Well, I can try this one. I think certainly we need to, like it, for instance, in the AQHI, perhaps incorporating heat messages in there. I think that could be an important approach. And in other words, whatever we have out there in terms of, and I know it's not necessarily all jurisdiction across Canada. I know Quebec's not using AQHI, for instance, but we need to have um, an approach where those health messages that are being used, whether it's by the Air Quality Index, the international sort of index, the AQHI, or any other index out there, that they incorporate the two together. I know that some people are working on this, but it's certainly something that we will need to focus on.
Thank you, Eric. Anyone else want to add anything on to that?
I think I would just add that, I think the the blessing and the curse of 2023 was that it did create a more captive audience that we have had for a long time in this topic. I remember working in air quality, health awareness 10 plus years ago, and no one had ever heard of the AQHI. Now you talk to your neighbors on the street, parents and friends, and people are telling you what number it is outside, and so we have come actually quite a long way, and we have a receptive audience. And so how do we leverage that more? And I really take the point about adding the heat piece, because I think people don't understand just how important that can be, especially from the lung health perspective.
Thank you, Sarah. We have one more in the chat. Since anthropogenic influences on air quality, like industry, automobiles, etc., are the major sources of pollutants outside of wildfire smoke, is there active advocacy on federal and provincial regulators on behalf of those living with asthma? It's a tough one. Who else should take that?
I mean, I can share that, we've been a part of a number of coalitions that have been really focused in particular on traffic related air pollution. So to that automobile portion of the question, one of the challenges with air pollution is to your point, there are so many different regulatory needs and areas for us to strive toward. So there's a lot of work to be done. Canada has made some ambitious targets. And so a big part of the policy asks have been, holding our feet to the fire. And there is a number of really good groups doing some work in that area, whether it be the electrification of school buses, whether it be ensuring that we're meeting emission standards. So, there's a lot of opportunities, I think, but we have some good goals in place, and we need to ensure that we're striving toward those.
Thank you, Sarah. And Anne?
Yeah, I'd just like to add the Canadian Pediatric Society recently started an environmental health working group. So there's a number of other people working alongside the Lung Association who are coming forward and saying, hey, we need to take care of environmental health.
Thank you. Thank you both for answering that. I'm going to ask one final question and then we'll wrap up. Are there specific early warning signs that a child may be developing asthma due to environmental exposures? What, as a parent, can I look out for?
Okay, I'll jump on that one, I guess. So I think that's a double-sided question. The first one is, do you suspect that your child may have asthma? And things like nighttime cough with activity or decreased activity tolerance. And, in a young child, that just means not keeping up with peers, or your breathing stops you before you should be tired or before you are tired, kind of things. Too sick with infections or long-standing cough after infections or things like that. Obviously, if you end up in the emergency room with an asthma attack, that's a big one. So does my child have asthma is the one question. And if you suspect it, talk to your healthcare provider. They can work with you. It's a hard diagnosis in little kids, but it totally can be done. Then the second question is my child having an asthma attack? And again, you're looking for cough, shortness of breath. Some kids wheeze, some kids don't wheeze. They'll have nighttime cough. They may not be able to keep up with others. It can be pretty frustrating for kids trying to do sports and things like that. So you're watching for symptoms. One of the critical things is that even young kids can be taught to tell people when they're short of breath, but you need to tell them how, because otherwise little kids just have a tummy ache. If it's between your eyes and your knees, it's a tummy ache, right? So you've got to help give them words. You've got to help show them how to use their inhalers, because at the end of the day, if your child is an expert, you'll feel confident that they're going to be able to get help from an adult, that they're going to be able to get control when they need it.
Thank you so much, Anne. So with that, we are coming to the end of our session. As I mentioned earlier, in the coming days, you'll be able to find a recording of this webinar on our website, and we will also send it via email to anyone who registered today. If you did enjoy our webinar today, we are hosting another one in the fall on odor management, so keep an eye on our newsletters and social media for additional information. Thank you so much to Anne, Eric, and Sarah for your excellent presentations and answering these great questions. We thank everyone who joined us today, and I hope you found this session informative and learned something. Please reach out if you have any questions. Otherwise, have a great day, everyone. Thank you.